Welcome to the Resume Storyteller, bringing you interviews with industry experts, regular folks who tested the job search waters and succeeded, and strategies to tell your story and land you job interviews. Here's your host, Virginia Franco.
I am so excited to have with me today Brie Reynolds, Brie Weiler Reynolds, who is a FlexJobs Career Development Manager. She's also a career coach at FlexJobs, which is the leading site for remote work and flexible jobs. She and the FlexJobs Career Coaching Team help empower people to find jobs to fit their lives by providing practical information, resources, and insights into remote jobs and the future of work. Brie holds a master's degree in human resources, is a certified resume writer, and has 15 years of experience advising job seekers and employers alike. She has shared her insights with Good Morning America, NPR's All Things Considered, and more. Brie, thank you so much for joining me. I'm sorry that I jumped on the call late, and I'm also thinking that I butchered your middle name. Is it Weiler or Wheeler?
It is Weiler. You got it. Very few people get that on the first try, so I appreciate that. No, and thank you so much for having me. This is great.
Well, I've been really looking forward to it. I have followed you on Twitter for a while, and I love the content that you share there.
Ditto.
And you heard me give just that brief introductory paragraph about you, but I'd love to hear about how you came to be in this position, because I imagine when you were a child, you never thought, most of us didn't know that flex and remote work was possible, right?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting transition over the last 10 or 15 years or so.
Right.
I actually started my career in college career services, doing advising for college students and alumni and, job search coaching and all those sorts of things. And the reason I got into that line of work at all was because when I was trying to think of what I wanted to do back in, college and my first couple of years outside of college, I realized that I was always tremendously interested in everybody else's jobs, all of them. I wanted to do all the jobs. I didn't want to commit. And then I remembered my own career services office at the university that I went to. And I thought, well, those folks get to talk to other people about lots of different jobs all day long. And that sounded pretty cool. And I had been a human services and counseling major in college. So I had that want, to help people, to support people. And it just seemed like a natural fit. So I jumped in.
Now, did you work in career services at your alma mater?
No, I actually worked just down the street. So I went to Northeastern University in Boston for undergrad. And then I started out as an administrative assistant in the career office at Emmanuel College, which is just across the street from Northeastern, actually.
Yeah.
And wound up getting my master's degree there and moved up the ranks in that office to assistant director before I left there. So it was an awesome experience. It was a nice little office. I got to do a little bit of everything. And clearly, if I can't pick one job, then I can't pick one task. So I like to do a little bit of everything within the job.
You and I sound familiar. My favorite part about writing resumes is that I get to hear everyone else's story. I find it way more interesting than my own.
Yes. I'm always endlessly fascinated by clients.
Well, when did you join? How long have you been working with FlexJobs?
I joined FlexJobs back in 2010. So this is 11 years this year. And I started out in just a part-time content role. Actually, my husband got a job that would make us move every year, which we thought was very exciting, but it wouldn't allow me to take my career advising job with me. Everything was very much on site back in the mid 2000s. And so I wound up deciding to go freelance, and write about job searching advice and that sort of stuff. And did the freelance remote thing for a little while and then stumbled into FlexJobs as a part-time writer. And I've been there ever since. I've done some of the content, grew the FlexJobs blog. We have thousands of advice articles on, resumes, cover letters, interviewing, all geared around remote and flexible work. And just about 3 years ago, we decided to start a career coaching program at FlexJobs for our members. And that's what I'm heading up now.
Oh, okay. So I didn't realize you'd been there for that long, but what that tells me is that you were there when we were struggling to get out of the recession, then the boom, and now the pandemic. So I would love to hear from you. What have you seen a shift or an increase in the amount of roles or the types of companies that are seeking remote or flex talent?
Yes, the short answer is yes. So I did join FlexJobs right in the middle of the last recession and saw the recovery happen and that sort of thing, over the years. And during that time, even during the recession and the slower recovery in those first few years out of it, remote jobs grew every year, which I thought was a very good sign that, this is an interesting trend. This is something people really value. And so it did grow every year, but it was very incremental, and it had been that way during that recession period. But then even after, getting into the mid 2010s, 2015, 2016, 2017, it had continued to grow, but it was very slow. And so it would grow every single year like clockwork, but the number of people stayed relatively small. So before the pandemic, we were talking about 4.9% of the US workforce working remotely all the time. So people who truly worked from home were employees of companies, but worked from home. So just about 5% of the population. And then the pandemic happened and we saw that skyrocket. So I think the last count that I saw was a Gallup survey. As of February 2021, 57% of the US workforce is still working remotely. So it went
from, it's not more, 57%. Okay.
Yeah. 57% of the whole workforce. And it's, that's so significantly higher than anything that has ever happened before, in terms of remote work.
That a combination of part-time, full-time.
Yes. Yes.
Everything?
So it's a little bit of a combination of everything. I think that count also includes those hybrid workers who are at home sometimes and in the office other times and things like that. And now the predictions for remote work over the next 5 years are that about 25% of the US workforce is going to continue working remotely in the long term. So going from 5% to potentially 25% is like a long term. It's huge to go that way in just a matter of a year.
That is interesting. Are you seeing a shift or an increase in the types of people looking for remote or flex roles, or maybe the kinds of roles that they're in, where before that 5% tended to fall into certain categories, and now it's, across different kinds of categories or industries?
Yeah, we've seen some interesting trends there. So we've seen it be really strong in the areas where it typically was strong. So things like computer and IT, medical and health, I think is one of those surprising ones that's always actually been a pretty strong remote career field. Lots of support roles in medical and health can be done remotely, but even we see nursing and physician positions that are done remotely, at least some of the time. So, and now we're all very familiar with telehealth since we've had to do that for a year. But then we've also seen project management over the last 3 or 4 years has really jumped up in terms of the number of remote options. And it used to be not even really in the top 10, and now it's the third highest career field for remote jobs. So project management's one that's really increased a lot. We also saw education and training this year, of course, increase as there was just more remote learning going on, and then the need for support services around that. And all sorts of business functions, business development, administrative roles, accounting and finance, those all have really high remote job numbers now. And then we've also been looking at some of the faster growing remote fields. So we actually looked in the pandemic year to see which fields grew the fastest in terms of the number of jobs being offered remotely. And the top 3 were marketing, administrative, and HR and recruiting. So just to kind of give you a little scope of what's growing right now. We also see things like writing and then mortgage and real estate, because we are seeing a bit of a real estate boom at the moment. So many people spending so much time at home.
I'm actually, when I think about it, like especially with recruiting and mortgage and real estate, I can't imagine those jobs being anything but flexible and remote. Did you just need a phone to access the software, right?
Exactly. You're on your phone a lot of the time doing those sorts of jobs, or on your laptop. So many of these are very portable careers. And I think finally they're catching up to the possibilities.
It's interesting. I cannot recall for the life of me where I saw this study, but I know I shared it maybe last month. I was thinking about that right now we're over half of the workforce is working remotely, and the forecast looks like half of those people will stay in that capacity. The study that I saw referenced the percentage of people that wanted to stay in that capacity, and it was pretty high. It was like 2/3 wanted to stay remote. But what I found really interesting is of those surveyed, and they only surveyed, a couple thousand, I want to say, but a full third of them said that it would be a deal breaker for them if the role went back to fully in person. Now, I don't know if those people would follow through and really quit, but I found that interesting because if 25% is a lot less than the third that said they would quit. So I'll be interested to see what happens if companies don't offer more options.
Yeah, one of the things we are working with clients on a lot right now is exactly that, is having the conversation with your company where you basically say that in the nicest possible way. You say, I do not want to return to the office. What are my options? And so we're working a lot, just kind of coaching people through how can they talk to their employers, and then also what to do if that is a no-go. If they are required to return to the office and they really don't want to, then it might be time to start looking for something new, which, as we've talked about, remote jobs are growing so much that it's a pretty good time to be looking for one. But, getting into that job search is, it has, slightly different things than a traditional job search, but that is a hot topic right now for sure. I think you're right. I've seen lots of surveys that say about 2/3 to even 3/4 of people do not want to return to the office. And there's a certain contingent that are just simply not going to do it. Some people will go back and they won't be happy about it, but there are some folks that will not do that.
That's right. And the job postings, the number of job postings that are remote do not seem to meet the capacity for all the people that want to do it. That's not to say, I do think there's probably a lot of postings where people would be open to remote, but they're just not suggesting that in their job descriptions just yet.
Yeah, exactly. We talk sometimes about looking for hidden flex because there are a lot of companies that are open to it, but they're still not putting it in their job descriptions. And so you have to do some more research, look for the jobs that you really want to do. And when you find those companies that may not say they're hiring remotely, go to their websites, look for, work-life balance articles, anything in the PR section where they've been in the news talking about remote work. Go to sites like Glassdoor and do your research to see if other people who work at that company talk about getting to work from home. See if there's any clues that you can find that they might be open to remote work, because there are lots of companies that are open to it, but still won't talk about it publicly.
That's right. They haven't set it up in stone. That's right.
Yeah.
So could you explain for my listeners and people like me that get very confused with the terminology? There's remote versus freelance versus flex versus alternative schedules. Do they all mean the same things or not?
That's a great question. And yes, most people, I would say, are probably confused by at least parts of these things.
Maybe.
So yes, when we talk about remote work, I think one of the most common misperceptions that we see is people think remote work is all freelance work. So they think if they're a remote worker, they are an independent, self-employed kind of contractor. And the reality is, based on the listings that we see at FlexJobs anyway, is that most remote jobs are employee jobs. So you are a traditional employee. You work for
W-2
one company.
employees.
Exactly. You're a W-2, and you to get the same typical benefits that you would if you were in the office, but you just happen to be working remotely. There are freelance remote jobs, which would put you in that category of being a contractor, self-employed, that sort of thing. So you have to pay attention, when you're looking at remote job listings to see how they categorize it, because it could be either way. And then freelance jobs in general, most freelance jobs are remote in some capacity because you're usually working from home, supporting a variety of clients. And that's, through that contract work. Flexible and alternative schedules are also two different things. So a flexible schedule is one where an employer gives the employee or the contractor, but if we're talking about this, it's usually employees that have quote unquote flexible schedules that allow the employee to have more control over their work days. So it takes a lot of different forms. So this is a good thing to ask in the interview process if it's unclear. But it could be something where you have completely flexible hours. Maybe you're told you're working a 40-hour-a-week schedule, but how you divide up those hours throughout the week is up to you. You might be told that you're going to work 8 hours a day, but when you work those hours is up to you. Or it might be something like time banking, where you are allowed to flex your hours and maybe you work fewer hours one day, more hours the next day, or you kind of bank your added hours that that you've worked so that you can take some extra days off the next week. There's so many different forms. So that's something to think about, is what would a really great flexible schedule look like? One that we see a lot in the pandemic is the split shift, where you work a little bit in the morning, you take time off in the middle of the day to be with kids or whatever your responsibilities are at home. And then you work a little bit in the evening. So you're kind of splitting up your days. And then the last one, alternative schedule, is anything that's outside of the traditional 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. So it's oftentimes nights or weekends. Those tend to be alternative schedules.
Okay. I was wondering about
Third shift, that sort of thing.
So all freelance jobs have a remote component, but not all remote roles are freelance.
Yes, exactly.
And then it didn't occur to me that flex means different things to different people. When I thought of it, I thought, well, as long as I get the work done, it doesn't matter if I work 20 hours or 60 hours. But what I'm hearing you say is that some people say, you have to work 8 hours a day, but how it looks during your day is different. Or you have to work 40 hours a week, and how you do that could be different. Yep. And it could be in a split shift or an alternative schedule, which is the third shift, graveyard shift, etc.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Perfect summation.
But you can quiz me on that later. So what do you view as the primary perks of the flex remote schedule? What are the main upsides?
Oh boy, where to start?
Yeah, right.
So as somebody who does work remotely and has a flexible schedule and I'll give the details of mine in case it's useful for anybody. Okay. I work roughly 40 hours a week, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less, but generally about 40. But the hours that I work each day are pretty much up to me, as long as they are fairly even throughout the week. So that's what we tend to do is, as long as you are available for about the same amount of time each day, the time that you're actually working each day doesn't totally matter. And so that's my typical schedule. But in terms of the benefits, I mean, for individuals, of course, there's tremendous work-life balance benefits. Obviously, in the middle of a pandemic, that becomes even more of a necessity. And not even work-life balance, but just keeping it all together, keeping it all afloat. So it can really help with that because, of course, it reduces or completely eliminates your commute time, gives you a lot of time back each day. Most people talk about that as the main benefit, that work-life balance, having more control over each day. But then there's also the cost savings that comes along with that, because if you're not commuting, you're saving, over the course of a year.
Gas, hair on your car, all of that.
Yeah, it's about $4,000 for the average person that say they're working from home full time. So it's not nothing. It's pretty good.
Wait, how much is it?
About $4,000 a year for the average remote worker, based on those average expenses of what the typical person pays for gas or, commuting passes, wardrobe upkeep, coffees and lunches out, things like that.
Interesting. I have worked remotely, and independently since 2008. And my job started out 20 hours a week, and now sometimes I work 50, 60 hours a week. Mm-hmm. But which I need to get under control. But I always tell people I would rather work 40 hours fully flexed than 20 part-time with a schedule set in stone, because a lot of women who are sort of the primary child caretakers ask me that question. Life always throws curveballs, especially when kids are concerned, kids and pets and all of that. And the ability for the schedule to truly be my own is worth the extra hours to me.
Yeah. 100%. It's so totally the case. And that is, you're working those longer hours. That can be one of the pitfalls if we're looking at, the positives and negatives.
Right.
Is that most remote workers do tend to overwork. They work longer hours than they did in the office, mainly because work's always there. And if you always have something to do and it's right there, you have to really be disciplined about walking away from it.
Yeah.
And it's hard to do.
Bailing on the discipline front. No, but so that, that brings me to the next question. So longer hours is certainly a potential downside. But what red flags what other downsides are there? If there are any, and are there any sort of red flags where someone could look at it and go, this is not a good fit for me. I really should go to a more traditional 9 to 5 kind of environment?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it really, as much as remote work works well for a lot of people, it really isn't for everybody. And maybe it's for some people some of the time, maybe that hybrid where you're in office and at home is the best option. But some of the downsides, definitely the ability to overwork if you're not careful, and you have to be really diligent and careful all the time. So that's, you have to set yourself up for success that way. But also the isolation of it, being, working from home, especially for people where the social aspect of work was a really valuable thing. Being from home, working from home all the time, you don't get that socialization as much. Now, you might have a team that you're interacting with a lot during the day, and that might be enough for you. Maybe it's, on Slack, or you do video calls.
Right.
But if you have the kind of job that is largely independent work and you're at home doing that by yourself, it can get lonely.
That's right.
And some people find that they just simply can't, deal with that, and they want to go back to the office. Other people will look for other ways to get that interaction throughout the day. So they might work at a co-working space or a coffee shop or something like that, or even just come up with activities that they have scheduled for themselves that get them, around their friends and family more often. So those are the two big ones, really. It's the overwork and burnout, and then the isolation are the ones we hear about most often.
It does seem to me, I wonder if you agree, that for the majority of people, having the flexibility, I'm going to go into the office to get the socialization, but then when my kid is sick, or, they want flexibility and ability. We want it all, right? We want to be able to go in and out when we want and work the hours we want.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the reasons probably that co-working spaces were so popular before the pandemic, at least, was because for freelancers, for remote workers, you when you want that socialization, you can go in and get it. You can be around other people. And I think a lot of companies are going to be looking at that hybrid type of arrangement now. And how do you afford people the socialization part of it, but also give them more control and all of the benefits of the remote work side of things? We've seen some companies getting creative with what they're going to be doing post-pandemic, but
I've been following who's going back, who's not, who's starting to ditch some of their office space. It's going to be really, really fascinating to see what happens as things open up.
The next few years. It's going to be, it's like the Wild West of remote work.
I think the next few months.
Yes.
I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and we're on our last group of vaccines before we get to kids. And so every day you get a new announcement of this company's opening. It was going to open up Labor Day. Now it's May, but it's only going to be part-time and maybe not. Like, things are just really, really in flux right now.
Yeah. The news changes every day with it.
Yeah. So you alluded to this a little bit, or we talked about it, alluded to it a little bit at the beginning. How would you recommend someone proceed when they hear about an opportunity and they say, that would be perfect for me, if it was in my city / not in an office / flex or remote? Especially those roles that are potentially, they don't advertise as flex or remote, but it would be great if they could.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because the pandemic has changed my typical answer to this question a little bit. Before, I would say it's pretty hard to get a company that doesn't show any signs of being open to remote work to change a job to be remote for you as an incoming candidate. So I oftentimes would say, well, you can apply, you can have the conversation, but definitely, don't
get your hopes up.
Yes. Keep your job search going in other places. Because it was really hard. Companies were, very set in how they did things. And if they didn't already have an existing program or just a common practice of people working remotely a lot, it was highly unlikely that they were going to let this one person change that.
And it also made roles outside of your geographical location sort of off the table, right?
Yes. Because you would have to be there. But now the pandemic, it really has changed that because more companies have been exposed to remote work. A lot more managers and company leaders who previously had said no to remote work are now much more open to it. And I think a lot of companies are going to have policies that at least allow for hybrid remote work going forward, even if they're not fully remote. And so I think the odds of this conversation actually going well for a candidate have increased a lot in the last year. So I would do what I was saying at the beginning, where you're doing your research and seeing if you can get any signs that this company may be remote. I would apply, send in your best cover letter, your best resume for the job. Make sure you put your best foot forward. And I would leave that conversation to the interview process. Probably that's my instinct.
Really? Okay.
That you could, if, and it could be early on, even in that screening interview process, you might say, hey, in doing some research on the company, I found that this mention of remote work, and I was wondering what the policies were. You could put it in a cover letter beforehand. As you're applying, and just let them know that that's something you're interested in. But I think because so many companies are in flux right now, they may not have a great answer. Whereas you get in, you show them kind of what you can do. And also you have to be clear about what type of remote arrangement you're really looking for. I know you mentioned geography being a big piece of this. If you're looking to work far away physically from the office remotely, that's a much bigger ask. If you're, because a lot of times companies actually can't do that if you're moving out of state or something like that because of the tax and employment law implications.
That's true.
But if you're still in the region, if you're still in the area, you could come to the office occasionally. It might be an easier sell. So that's definitely something to consider.
Okay. Yeah, because a lot of my clients are targeting, national companies with a nationwide presence. And so they have been coming to me and saying, well, it really doesn't matter where I am now. So maybe I should go for that role that is on another post where I wouldn't have before, because now they, before a lot of them embrace some sort, they were used to some remote teams, but now it's just exploded. Do you have a different thought on how to tackle that challenge?
Yeah, that I think the research is going to be key with that one because of those tax and employment laws that I was mentioning. So a company may have a nationwide presence, but they only hire in, say, 5 states or 10 states. And so because they have to register in each state where they're going to be employing people. And so some companies either can't or don't want to register in each state because that's a big expense. It's a lot of extra legal and employment law or tax and employment law issues to keep track of and make sure you're on the right side of. We have seen some interesting different types of software and services pop up since the pandemic began that are aiming to help companies with this, to do it a little bit easier. So fingers crossed, hopefully my answer will be different next year too. But I would say one thing actually you can do on FlexJobs, if you know that company's name, you can go to FlexJobs, search for that company and look at their remote job posting history and see if there's anything there. And we have a database, I think there's up to 55,000 companies now. And so you can search by company name and just see what their history is. And if you're finding remote job listings, in those listings, you will be able to see the states that they're hiring in or the location that they're requiring for that job. So you could see if it's a US wide job, that means they'll hire anybody from within the US. If it lists a specific set of states, then you have to be located.
There's hiring limitations. Interesting. And I would suppose, in addition to the listings on FlexJobs, for maybe those companies that don't advertise it as being flex, or they haven't really committed fully to that, you could do searches on LinkedIn and see if there are employees in your state.
Yes, that's a great idea too. Yep, that's perfect. Just to see if anybody's employed in that other place, in the place that you want to work from.
Yeah, thank you. I had not even considered the hiring implications. I'm going to share that with my clients. So thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's tricky. It's one of the toughest parts about this for job seekers. And we see so many clients who find what they feel is their dream job and they want to apply for it. And we look at the location requirements and go, nope, this one is going to be a tough sell because they're outside that location. So that's actually probably a huge tip for if you're looking for a remote job, make sure you're putting in your location when you search.
Okay. Now for not 57%, whatever the difference is between 57 and 100. So that's 43%. For the 43% of people that are their job has not shifted since the pandemic. Do you think, and I guess it depends on the role, but do you think that there is a shot that those people could, help the employer to embrace the ability for change, or those sorts of jobs just so set in stone because they require hands-on, in-person kind of work?
I think just based on the little bit of research that I've done into that area, those jobs that are still being done on site, most of them do seem to be on site specific jobs. So it's things
Yeah.
like manufacturing, delivery, food service.
Yeah, there's no
those
real
sorts of
workaround.
things. Yeah. But for anybody who's in one of those types of jobs and wants to work remotely, oftentimes we find career changers who say, I've worked on site. The work that I do doesn't translate to remote work, but I want to work remotely. What can I do? There, you can definitely change careers and find something that aligns with, your skills, what you're good at, that would be a remote job instead of what you do. It'd be a different type of job, but
That's right.
I always like to encourage people, like, career change is not only possible, people do it all the time. So definitely don't rule yourself out if you're in that situation.
No, that's right. And that requires a little bit more of a deep dive to figure out what skills you have that you like to do, what skills you have that you don't like to do, and really hone in on what your next job target should be.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. You just have to be extra diligent about those specific things.
So if someone comes to you and they are seeking, they want flex or remote employment, are there a couple of tools that you absolutely feel that they need in order to embark on a job search? What can they not be without?
Yeah. In terms of, for your job search, the resume aspect of it, if you have any previous remote experience, you definitely want to have that on your resume. So mention that something was fully remote, it was partially remote. You don't have to be super specific, but you could say like 50% remote if you knew it was about half and half. You could say occasional remote work, anything like that. And then for literal tools to do remote work, we do see that employers like to see candidates that have experience with remote collaboration tools. So, the software and the programs that remote teams use most often. Those are things like Zoom, of course, Slack.
Right, which now everyone's an expert, right?
Yes. Google Drive, those sorts of things. So not anything, super extensive, but definitely those collaboration and communication platforms that remote teams use. The nice thing is with things like Zoom and Slack and Google Drive, they all offer free versions. So if you're not familiar for some reason, you can go out and test them out and learn them and then add them to your resume so you can talk about them.
That's a really good point. In terms of adding to your resume, if you maybe haven't worked fully or partially remote, do you think there's benefit in adding things like, manage a globally distributed team, just to show that you have worked with people located all over the place and you're familiar with the ability to work with people that aren't necessarily right in the room with you?
Yeah, absolutely. We always talk about, make sure if you worked with people who were out of your office, if you collaborated mostly over email or phone with people, even if you were in the office all the time, worked across time zones. I love how you said like the globally distributed team. Okay. Absolutely, that can count because you're working the same way that a remote worker would work.
That's right. Yeah, show that you've worked remotely even though you did it in the office.
Yeah, exactly. You were remote from other people.
Right, so last and final question, my favorite one. It sounds like you have worn many, many hats at FlexJobs. What's next for you now that the world seems to slowly but surely be opening up again?
Yeah, it's interesting because we're doing a lot less trying to convince people that remote work is a good thing.
Right. I know you're right. You're not fighting the uphill battle anymore.
Yeah. We've kind of reached the top of the hill, which is great. So now it's more really teaching people how to make remote work really well in quote unquote normal times. So I think the pandemic, we were so relieved when everybody seemed to embrace remote work despite the incredibly stressful and difficult circumstances they had to do it in. Remote work is usually way easier and more fun than it has been for the last year. So if you've been able to remote work for the last year, you can definitely do it at any point in time. So that's one of the things is really just helping companies understand how to do this well, how to get these hybrid offices in place, what policies they need to look at, how to make sure that things are equitable for in-office and remote workers. And then from the job seeker side, just how to help people really navigate this job market as it changes and grows, and things like employment and tax laws, keeping track of locations that you're applying to, researching companies, all those sorts of things. And then what to ask to make sure that you are, if you accept the job, that you're going to be on a remote team that you really want to be on, because each remote team operates differently. They have their own team cultures, and some do it better than others. So you want to make sure you're going to be on a team that does it really well, so you can have a good work day every day. No,
you're right. And culture fit is so important in that. And now with remote opportunities, that's a whole nother area that you need to assess the culture fit.
Yes. Yep. And I'm sure that'll change over the years as companies get better at it too.
That's right. It's probably going to change over the course of the next few months. So things are just moving at such an accelerated pace, though. But it is exciting.
Yeah, it really is. It's a fun time to be this immersed in remote work. That's for sure.
You picked a good field to be in right now. Who would have thought a global pandemic would make it the perfect environment?
Yeah. We try to say we're not happy with why it's happening, but we are glad that remote work seems to be, doing its fair share to help out.
No, and you're so well positioned to really help people on both sides of the hiring table to navigate these uncharted waters.
Yes, uncharted for sure.
So thank you so much for taking the time. I learned a lot. I know my listeners will. It's just such a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was a really lovely chat. And if anybody has any questions, I'm on Twitter, and you can find me at FlexJobs, and I'm happy to help.
Well, so on your bio, I've got the FlexJobs website, the remote.co website, your email, your Twitter. Then I've got @work flexibility, @Brie W Reynolds, and @remote_co. Are those the best places to connect with you?
Yes. Yep. Those will all work just perfectly.
Okay. Well, thank you again.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Virginia.
You've been listening to The Resume Storyteller with Virginia Franco. To learn more about storytelling strategies to catch the eye of today's online CM hiring and decision makers, please visit www.virginiafrancoresumes.com.